Thank you for joining us for tonight's Cannabis Lab panel. This is our regular scheduled monthly meeting. Tonight's panel is a great expert one. It is on technology for compliance in cannabis. We have a great panel here. Technology has a spot near and dear to my heart. It's where my background was and where I came from. Although I'm on the plant touching side of the business now, technology always makes our lives easier, and that's something I'm learning now that I'm out of the business. Everything that I've ever told my clients is starting to come to fruition, but also the budget conversation is real as well. So with that being said, some housekeeping before we get going. Our next event after this one is going to be another virtual event that's going to be on August 18th. That's going to be led by Eric Stevens, and it's going to be on government relations in cannabis. So if you want to check that one out, you can head to joinclab.com and sign up for that one. You can also Google Eventbrite Cannabis Lab. That will also get you directly to the Eventbrite link. And if you're not signed up for our newsletter yet, the lab report, definitely check that one out. There's some great information in it. And of course, it will update you on all of our great events are. After that, we're going to have our next in-person event is going to be in Delray Beach, Florida on August 25th. That's going to be diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's going to be anchored by our own Aisha Alves from Flower Hire. So if you want to come out, meet everybody in person, have a great networking opportunity, and just have some fun, that's going to be on August 25th from 6 to 9 p.m. Folks, if you're not a member of C-Lab, if someone invited you to this, our membership is worth its weight in gold. We do have discounts at the different dispensaries. Check it out, joinclab.com. So with that being said, I will go ahead and turn this over to our excellent panel here, anchored by Mo. Mo, please take it away. And Dan, turn your video on.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, for joining us today. We're going to touch on not only kind of like the compliance, but like what is the data behind the compliance, and like what do we do with this next? Like what's the evolution of this, and how are different organizations leveraging technology to help them get better at what they're doing, whether it's from a production processing perspective or a marketing perspective or the entire kind of customer or buyer journey. So I want to kind of kick it over first to Dan and kind of give us your perspective. I know you've been in the space for a while, you've seen a lot, you've done a lot yourself. Give us your perspective on how compliance and data and all this interrelates, and how you're using it yourself in a day-to-day practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Florida, we're vertically integrated. So that means that we have to cultivate, manufacture, process, distribute, deliver, and sell all within one operation, one cohesive operation. So data is key from seed to sale, literally from start to finish. And the data that's collected by the individual licensees and each part of that vertical is crucial for the success down the supply chain. I think that's a good place to pause.
Cool. Thanks, Sparky. Eric, can we get your perspective? I know that I'd spoken with your COO Munir, and he told me how you guys are leveraging camera technology in the retail environment, how you're understanding like where are customers going when they come in? Are they standing in front of a certain fixture? Like, what does that mean? How do we drive traffic in those scenarios?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm Eric Schissel, CEO and CTO of Curate. What we do is both IT management and security management. And the data we see is largely generated by systems like BioTrack. And our primary focus is keeping data, firstly, secure and safe, but secondly, making it actionable. The concern that we have with a lot of data is that it's just kind of out there and not really analyzed at all. So what we do with the camera data, for instance, is watch the trends. We're able to heat map where traffic goes throughout a store so that you can engage your buyer where they are. Or if you notice that, for instance, your highest margin items are not where the traffic is flowing, you can either adjust the traffic or adjust where that is. So retail intelligence is a massive part of this, as is obviously the security and the tracking of people throughout your system. The other thing that we can do that's really clever is within the cultivation facility, you can track a person from when they walk in the building to when they leave throughout the whole thing. So we're using data in a little bit of a different way than I think a lot of analysts are. We're using it in more of a actionable, what do we do now sort of format.
Very interesting. Thank you. Andrew, I know that you work a lot with data, and I have an understanding of some of the things that you can do, but day by day, I'm very amazed at, the exhaust that comes out of compliance tracking, right? So Sparky hit on from literally from seed to sale. So the data that you're mandated to collect in this process goes from what is this seed, what bag did it come from, what's the strain, right? And we have all this like data that gets populated along the way. But a lot of times what we're focused on is what is the end result. Understanding like that entire pipeline and being able to forecast forward, and then not only understand what needs to be in the store at the right time, but who we're going to sell it to. Andrew, can you kind of touch on some of the things that you're able to do with like data and help businesses grow and understand based off of that?
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of important parts here, because there is what we're collecting, and sometimes what we're collecting, going back to what Eric said just a few minutes ago, is that we want to make it usable. And the problem with a lot of the data that we collect is it's really not usable. It's non-standard. It's, by the way, you have a visitor behind you, Mo. I just want to wave to everybody, everyone on the camera. So we, one of the things that actually makes it usable is standardization. And what's interesting about compliance and regulation is that mandates some standards and some regulation. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to actually pull more insights out of the information that you get. The problem with the cannabis industry right now is from state to state, even within the vertical, like Dan was saying, or and especially across, the data is absolutely non-standardized. What we can do with the data, to your point, going all the way from seed to sell, is you can look at optimization strategies. You can look at the supply chain like people do with blockchain, et cetera, and you're able to analyze from any given circumstance what are the optimization strategies that you could do at any given mechanism. So if you're going from the producer to the retailer, there's optimizations there. You can talk from cultivation to the producer, there's optimizations there. But what a lot of people miss is that there's also jumps. A jump going from the cultivation into the retail and what's going out the door can actually manifest itself into what should we be growing? What should we be doing? What are people buying? So there's a lot of opportunity there to link data that goes from the seed to the cell for operationalization of all those different kind of functions and optimizations. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. So in Connecticut, in New York, in Ohio, and in Louisiana, they've adopted this like pharmacy style of cannabis monitoring. And what I'm talking about here is at the retail level, they report to the prescription monitoring system for that state, right? And essentially all that data that's being collected is the same information that flows across to insurance companies, right? And the United, the Cignas, like, how close, like, do you think we are for these guys to be able to reimburse? Like, we're seeing this in New Mexico where Ultra Health is making that challenge right now. Like, from your perspective, you come from pharma, you worked at WebMD, like, you've seen both sides now. What's your perspective here?
We're close, and I think that it's going to be and as we get closer and closer to federal legalization, it's going to be mandated as part of a treatment regimen. And I think that both the insurance companies and also the providers will actually push for it because, one, what's probably unknown in the industry right now is that lower costs of treatment actually drive value for both the insurers and the providers, and also better care for the patients. So getting the right product in front of the right patient, and also then having that mandated by a treatment guideline or a treatment algorithm that the physician can follow, actually helps across the board. It helps on the ability for people to get the right products. It helps on our ability to actually prove that out for claims management. And actually, so that reality of being able to say, hey, we know what this product does and we can then treat based off of some treatment guideline. It's very, very close, and we're getting closer as we speak. That's one of the things that Forian is doing, is we're connecting that cannabis data from the BioTrack system And we're connecting that to physician and patient level claims data so that we can draw those conclusions. Now that's connected in a de-identified way, but what it does, it allows us to help create those algorithms and the proof points behind it so that you can generate, again, a new compliance mechanism to say, this is the treatment algorithm that an insurance company or a physician should take in treating a condition.
Very interesting. Eric, as I'm listening to kind of Andrew talk about some of this, I know you touched on that you guys have a strong security focus. Can you talk about like how you see all of this interplaying, like for the industry to evolve to this level, right? And we can get reimbursement. Security is obviously a big thing, but cannabis is still kind of acclimating to the level of technology, security, scrutiny that is needed in comparison to other industries. Can you kind of give us your take on that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question and the context. We're finding that there are a few different classes of clients, right? Those that are getting into it because they want to sling some bags, and those that are getting into it looking at it as a business and looking at it as an emerging industry that has, changing an ever-changing landscape, right? We've seen so many changes on the fly in certain states that cause companies to be very reactive. But those that are thinking about it in the long term, like we're working with a medical group out of New York to develop a massive infrastructure so that they can treat their patients directly. They're coming at it from a HIPAA perspective in terms of data security anyway, and in terms of their physical infrastructure, they're coming at it from a much more structured approach than many of our clients in some of the more legacy states, we'll call them. I think that as time goes on, the data will, by necessity, be more normalized because people will want the data that Andrew just was talking about. It has to be, because right now, we're talking about different levels of data requirements. So if I have a retail store, I want the data around transactions. I want to know when I'm supposed to staff the right people to make sure we have the right bartenders there at the right time, so on and so forth, right? Like all of that is it's typical. It's typical of retail. However, when we start talking about vertically integrated operations that are tracing it from seed to sale and eventually to actual usage and reporting back, that data has to be in far better shape than it is right now, and also more portable. What we're finding when our clients are asking us for integrations, and we want to do that. However, the data that we have accessible to us it's not standard, and it's often not even accessible. So I think that a lot of work has to happen on the back end in order for this ubiquity to actually happen.
You mind if I just jump in real quick, Mo? Because I think that Eric brought up some really excellent points. Because one of the things that I think that we also need to realize is that just like in other industries that are state regulated, even with federal legality, that it's still going to take differences state by state to bring and operationalize that data. There's not going to be necessarily a mandate of how this is how you treat all data. Maybe with HIPAA, there's a single level of regulation, but if you think about alcohol and beverage, that's still basically state regulated in a lot of cases. New Jersey has different retail operations than Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York, et cetera. So there's still going to be differences in the way that you collect, enhance, and utilize that data. So I think that portability notion that Eric is talking about is that you have to be able to bring it in, transform it, and then still, again, I think the important word is make it usable. And again, the compliance and regulatory factors here actually allow us to actually help do that because it gives mandates around this is how you have to actually, let's say, talk about your product, or this is the way that you have to label your product. It actually helps in some of those functions.
And to build on that, when medical is national, well, all those rules will apply. Portability of patient records.
Yep.
Well, y'all better get your act together on the supplier side, because that's a different ballgame.
So that, to your point there about that standardization, right, with the medical, that's why when I see the PMP, so I'm a pharmacist by trade. So when I see that and I'm like, what, that is the same prescription processing data that insurance companies are determining average wholesale price, acquisition price, reimbursement, like this is our precursors, right? And those states, they have a strong pharmacy lens, right? Like they conduct themselves with pharmacists. They do checks on people's medication records through the prescription monitoring system. So all that kind of is in place. but both you and Andrew have touched on the non-standardization, right? We have huge gaps. One state's interpretation is different than another state's. They use the same word, but it has a different meaning. And so I know that as I've started to work with Andrew, we have been working on a data factory, right? Because that was one of the big things when we teamed up, which was like, this data is a mess. Like, how are we going to make sense of it? So we created a data factory and an ontology where we are bringing it in, classifying it, and then being able to slice and dice it. And one of the things that we've been able to do is we've developed an analytics program for the state of New Mexico. So they went rec a few months ago. They have all these questions, right? They're trying to understand their supply chain, and do they have too many licenses or too few licenses, and how quickly are things turning themselves over? So we've been able to kind of move in that direction, right? And as I've been seeing that happen, and talking to the Crescos and the Curaleafs and the different MSOs out there, everybody's starting to move in the same direction, right? Which is like, we need more data, we need clean data. Like, how do we understand it? How do we? Because frankly, even outside of our space, right? This is how Amazon and Google and all these other giants are doing it, right? Like, you log into Amazon and they're ready to ship to you in 2 hours. Like, they know what you're going to buy. Like, we're moving in that direction, and the technology and the standardization is the infrastructure, right, that is needed to actually get us there. Andrew, can you touch on the RFM kind of and how that works? And I'd be interested, like, once you talk about that, Eric's perspective in terms of connecting those two technologies where they have the camera systems, right? And you're looking at it from their behavior, right? Like, what are they trying to buy and how often are they trying to buy? Can you touch on that?
Yeah, sure. Let me go backwards for just a second and let me touch about the word ontology is scary to some people, but it's honestly just a classification system. And what we do is we scrape all of the descriptives and the data sets that we have. So from the point of sale, et cetera, or from a state system, we're able to then classify the products into levels of the product category. So in some states, let's say it's 13 categories that they classify it. All of us know that the classification system of real cannabis products is much larger than that. I think ours is 6 levels and about 2,500 different categories specifically. So that's what we do. We take it, we utilize the data, and we then are able to classify so that you can draw conclusions by rolling that classification up or rolling it down. So this makes things like seeing issues in products, so, product side effects, or if you were to look at differences in batch, it makes it much easier because you can roll those insights up and down and then compare them. So just to make sure that that's clear for everyone. The second piece of that is that then the RFMT is an analysis that is fairly standard in retail industry. It's a recency, frequency, monetization value, and we added another category, which is the trier score. So that's why we call it RFMT. That T is a trier score, which is an index of whether people are willing to try more products or less likely to try. And so what it really gives you, it gives you the behavior of individuals at the store, and we're categorizing them together to say this group of people act similarly. So these people act as if they are price sensitive, so they're really going after the discounts. These people look like they're actually moving around from dispensary to dispensary, so therefore, they're at risk for that dispensary. Or these people are the big spenders, and so therefore, they're spending a lot of money, and maybe they're product loyalists. But what we do is that we're able to identify these people's behavior both by what they're doing at the dispensary over time, but then also tying that to then what a basket analysis would do by what's in their basket. You're able to viably understand what exactly should they be buying in the next. How could you market to those so we can push these segments out for marketing events? And then you can also re-engage these people when they're in store by saying, hey, here's the menu and here's what we think that you should buy next, because we know you're a product loyalist, or we know you're a trier, or we know that you're really promotion response sensitive. So that's what the RFMT stands for. And so that's the rationale behind it.
Eric, with your video technology, are you tokenizing the individuals? Is it like doing a count, just knowing that an individual there, like, can you kind of speak to that? Like, it would be interesting to leverage his RFMT with your video capability, right? Like, and do a test, right? Like, drive these people to a certain register? Did they spend an extra 30? Like, can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I do want to take a little bit of a step to the side before I do that, though, because
Sure.
we're talking about a couple of really big buckets of data, a few of them, and they have different requirements. So we're talking about consumer data, we're talking about marketing data, buyer intent, and all of that fun stuff that goes along with the rec market. All of that can lead to better demand anticipation and tracking of your operations, so on. But on the medical side, fundamentally, we're talking about a product that is highly variable, right? So if you're selling medicine, the generic is essentially the same as the brand, but those are the two variables. But when we're talking about a strain that was raised in a different market by a different guy that put in different nutrients and so on, we're talking about something that, while we can track the sale, we can't necessarily rely on the lab data to tell us the right information about the product, the use, and then the outcome. So it's kind of flawed as it currently stands. And I don't know that we can do any better because we're talking about a plant. There are so many variables there. So when we're looking at the tools that this industry have, we're not talking about the same type of tools that most of our traditional clients have. So our company has a sister company that works in traditional markets and works in enterprise systems. We don't have, because of the fragmentation of the market and all of the other issues the market has, we don't have the same analytical tools that other industries have access to. So we kind of have to build it ourselves. And so that's essentially what you're doing with your data warehouse, if you will. You're seeing the need and then anticipating. And I guess I question what happens when federal legalization happens and those tools immediately become available. How does that shift the applications that are being developed? All that aside, to the cameras. We basically tie the transaction ID that's on the receipt through the point of sale system to what's on the VMS, the video management system. And through that, we can determine who that person was, and we can trace back through the store. And it does sound a little creepy, and it, I guess, kind of is, but we don't really look at who that person is. That information is we're not privy to that whatsoever. We can see the trends, and we can see, over time, the point of sale data corresponding to the camera data and then the number counts of people walking in and out of the door. But over time, it will get even more intelligent. It will flag people as they walk in the door and prompt the bud tender on a compliant point of sale system and say, oh, have you thought about getting, this edible that you had last time? Are you out? It will lead to more actionable data over time.
Very cool. So you guys are printing on the screen the transaction.
So when the transaction happens on the point of sale, the camera knows that transaction is happening there and traces the user to that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Andrew, that would be pretty powerful. I mean, you begin to draw the full circle there. I mean, this that's the cool thing, I guess, about this space, right? Is like we are in the driver's seat. We're on the edge here. We're making this stuff kind of happen because, frankly, it's necessity for a lot of us, and it's exciting along the way. Andrew, can you talk about like some of the classification capabilities? I know that you're working with the state of Arkansas and different organizations within the state there about helping them do studies and kind of understand the outcomes behind the compliance data.
Yeah, I want to go back to something that Eric said, is that because it's an important fact that the variability of the plant is super important. So the more that labs or products can be made less variable, however you want to say that and however you want to do that, is something that happens when you pull in compliance and regulation and you pull in, how the SLAs and SLPs of how plants are necessarily curated and cared for. Very similar to like the tobacco industry as an example, right? But what I want to say though is that the interesting part of that is batch level testing and labs can still be also then paired with the outcomes of what products those are being consumed, and we can still track the outcomes, again, patient level specifics about what's happening with those patients. I think that's something that Eric in what you're both driving at is that the way that we're looking at being able to prove out, and again, something that's a regulation in typical markets, such as the National Division of the Advertising Bureau for the Better Business Bureau, looks at all claims that product make and make sure that you can say it. So there's clinical claims, there's consumer claims, there's proofery claims, there's all these type of claims. Right now, there's no real strong regulation in the cannabis industry saying, hey, you can say this or you can't say that, or you have to make sure you can say this because it's an ingredient, et cetera. So it's a little bit more loose. But as we get closer and closer, one, brands are going to see the need to be able to make those claims. Brands are going to see the need to be able to say, yes, my drug can treat insomnia like I'm saying on my package. When also the patients are going to demand that, right? The patients are going to demand that they want to understand what they are going to, and they're not going to want to have to go in and experiment with different products to get to the right combination. They're going to at least want that a starting point that actually serves their purpose. And so that's, again, what we're trying to do with some of our relationships. And Arkansas and ACHI is a good example of that. They are doing some of the outcomes-based research for the state of Arkansas, and we are supplying that data. We are also talking about helping them try to actually integrate that data into their all payers claims database so that their Arkansas itself can look backwards retroactively and look at the effects of these products. This can also be done, though, at the brand level. It can also be done at the cultivation level, where we want to isolate the events that say, this is what these products do, because then you're going to guide consumer trust. You're going to be able to say those claims on your packaging. You're going to actually then be able to prove that in the market, which is just going to give you more and more stickiness of your people to your product.
Wow. So you got the home run figured out, right? You're going to be able to solve everybody's problems now?
No, we're trying. First,
so you both talked about something that I always think about, right? Which is the plant genetics, right? We get these QA values. They're kind of standard. They tell us more or less what we kind of already know about it, but we don't know much more, right? To your point, Eric, the Blue Dream from Florida to California to Vegas to wherever else, it's not the same, right? We don't even know if it's really Blue Dream half the time. And I know that for a fact because I get copied on emails where people are asking to change strain names in state systems. So from my perspective, I feel like the DNA and the genetic testing of these strains is really going to be like the next step to help us begin to draw a stronger correlation between, you know, what those consumer trends are, what the efficacies and the tendencies are for it to treat different conditions and different symptoms are, right? We get closer and closer to fine tuning what it is we're saying and what it is we're producing. Where do you think that sits? Eric, Andrew, I'm just Sparky, like, are we close? Are we far away? You know, I've spoken to a couple of these companies that do this. I feel like it's priced too high. Nobody's going to do it because it's not mandated. And you would need a massive sample, right, for it to begin to be meaningful.
As it goes, people in this industry do not love spending money on things that do not have a direct return in a very short period of time. So if it comes to capital outlay and somebody finding that or thinking about doing this, I don't see that happening unless mandated or one of the big players does and says, hey, our products across multiple states, anything sold by Cresco, we guarantee X, Y, or Z because we control all of it and we test all of it with our own labs and so on. But then it's not a standard, it's a standard within Cresco. So I think that there's going to be continued fragmentation. I don't see that happening. I think that's a great goal, but I think we're quite a few years out from it being treated like a true pharmaceutical. And I also think that there's going to be a market for that, but there's always going to be the kind bud market. So
100%.
there's,
Yeah. Just to add to that, if you don't mind, I just almost called you Sparky. Sorry, I'm getting your guys' nicknames confused now. I think that what's interesting is I completely agree, and I think that that's what's so interesting about making sure the labs are testing and viable, et cetera, within any given product. Because there's one more piece that we're missing. It's the phenotype of the product or the plant, but also the phenotype of the individual. because we have one more intersection point, which is the person. And so testing is going to be differentiating in this is just like in the pharmaceutical industry. One product in the pharmaceutical or ethical pharmaceutical industry does not work similarly in one person than it does another. Now, there's obviously some variation there, but in reality, there is some range to that effect, just like there is going to be in cannabis. So I think that there's 2 points here that we need to see both the clinical evidence, the laboratory evidence on the phenotype of the plant side. We also need to see that medical evidence as to the, let's say, bioavailability of the product within the individual's labs. So meaning the medical labs. I think both of those are going to be interesting and actually prove out how we can actually further this industry in an interesting way.
So
Thanks,
part
Andrew.
of the data question then is, what can we actually get at? Right? Like what we're talking about here is a massive lack of data.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. I think what you just said though previously, and I think one of your original comments is the portability of that data. And so I think the portability and the connectivity of that data is what's important. So we are able to then, if we're able to classify, make sure that we understand what it is, get the labs in, but then also be able to connect and say, hey, here's how this rolls up and rolls down. Here's where those similarities are. We've always talked about how genotypes, like you guys used the example Blue Dream, in one state may be different, but there's still obviously some overlap. So how is that overlap and what can you actually feather from that information? So I think I think it's the linking of that data, the portability and the linking of that data is where we're going to need to get to in the immediacy until we have a huge repository like a very large cannabis knowledge graph.
Thanks for telling us we're at least 10 years away.
Sure. I wish I could say that it was tomorrow, but
No, I hear you. I hear you. No, and I guess, so these are things that I deal with on a regular basis, which is, helping MSOs and strategics kind of understand the data, helping the states make sense of what the data looks like as it's being reported. Sometimes, the state representatives interpret things based off of trends or statistics. And, I explain to them this is more like an art form, especially when we start talking about how we're processing and the different forms and what they're trying to do, right? That's the one cool thing about this space is in terms of product, like evolution, it is constantly being evolved. They're constantly trying new things and doing new things. And it's very rapid. And from the government's perspective, they are trying to wrap their heads around a lot of this. And that's, kind of coming back to New Mexico with that Canalytics tool. That was one of their concerns is like, they're like, we don't know every product that's out in our market. Like, what does this mean? Like, they want to have some level of control, but the market is like rocking and rolling. It's kind of hard to put brakes on that. So they're trying to get visibility to better understand what's out in their supply chain. Another state that I'm talking to is having a very similar conversation, which is like, we want to control what's hitting the shelves and, getting them a level of confidence around the product that you're producing, right? They don't know if everybody can actually make gummies properly, right? Or brownies or things that have water content that can go bad, right? And create mold and so there's a lot of that on the state side where they are asking similar questions about the data and trying to understand it and take action from that perspective. I think a lot of this is organizations like us and Eric and what Andrew does and the actual operators to create a working group to help push the narrative around standardization. I know there's on the national front, there's all these organizations trying to push for federal legalization or interstate or the banking piece or the insurance piece. Nobody really is talking about the technology piece, right? Nobody's talking about standardizing the data, right? Like, how does the data flowing from New York get interpreted by California, right? How do they make heads or tails of that? Because at a certain point, interstate will occur. The standardization is going to be critical for the state systems, for the businesses to be able to receive and push data to each other.
That's going to have to be federally funded. There's no state, there's no private company that's going to invest in a standardization process. Yeah.
I would think that that would need to be spearheaded by the labs. The laboratories would need to, or a third party. Um, Everything that we're talking about is really in testing in some format, verifying the genetics, potency, safety. This is all done in a lab setting. So the standardization really needs to start there, in my opinion.
I mean, you work for an organization here, Sparky. I mean, where's the line, right? From like, okay, we want to do the right thing, and this is our SOP, and this is our business practice, versus the cost piece, right? Like that's always where, you know, at least in the conversations that I have, it's like, okay, we can do all these great things, and if you want to do all this, but here's the price tag, right? And then reality begins to set in, and I think that is the perspective that I kind of look at things from. Is like, what can actually be done, right? And given how people are going to behave and how decisions will be made, not how we map things out on paper.
I think that the fact that regulations are constantly shifting and new products are being entered into a market, you know, requires you know, a certain level of agility, right? Ability to be agile, and you know, that's the name of the game, really, is being able to adapt. So it's a lot. It's most definitely a lot, and ever changing.
I wanted to open it up to the rest of the speakers. If there's any comments, any other things you want to bring up before we wrap up here. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, C-Lab.
Awesome.
Todd, am I
Well,
handing up? There you go.
Thank you guys for your knowledge tonight. Before we let you guys go, folks, the Q&A is open. If you have any questions for our panelists before I let them go, please type them into the Q&A and I will read them out for you. So let's just give them a minute to do so. No, nothing yet. Nobody's left yet, and they're just staring at us. So I figured somebody might type.
That's getting a little creepy, I think.
All right. Well, thank you everybody again for attending. Like I said, our next event is going to be on August 18th. It's going to be a virtual event. Check that out at joinclab.com. Check out the membership at joinclab.com. Oh, hey, look, we got questions now. What are your thoughts on third-party softwares for gathering analytics? One seed to sale for all business units or different best in class for each? Let me know if you need me to repeat that.
So from the seed to sale perspective, you know, I obviously represent BioTrack, but I think whatever's best fit in your market and for your business is the way to go. The seed to sale is critical to, it's the underpinning of kind of the whole organization. You want something that works for your team, it works for your business, your SOP, your environment. That would be my recommendation there. I don't know, Andrew, if you want to talk about the analytics piece.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to actually jump in. I think it really depends. And it depends on what third-party software provider you're actually looking at. If you're looking at someone that's outside of the industry, it gets hard because if you try to go to a typical retail software analytics firm, they will have a harder time pulling in what you would consider the nodes or the right data to be able to analyze for that specific need set. So there are still a lot of specifics around the cannabis industry that don't allow general analytics companies to be able to do to provide some of the deeper analytics that are needed. I think that there are opportunities there. I think that they can. So I think it's a both. I think it depends on the use case.
I'm just going to chime in here. This is less about data and more about people. Standardization across your organization makes a ton of sense when you start scaling. You don't want to have multiple, LMS entries or learning management system entries for all these different systems that are in place. You want your grower to be able to go, or your master grower to be able to grow from one place to another, regardless of the state, and understand how to use the system. So I'm a big proponent for picking the best fit for your organization and going for it.
I feel like I feel like I asked that question back in March of 2020 at our last in-person before the pandemic. All right, well, we have no more questions. So thank you again to our panelists. Everybody wait. Can we use other countries' data as references? I mean, I think the only country that has a huge swath of data, I'm not on the panel, but is Israel. I'll let you guys answer if you want.
The answer is you could. I
Use
don't
other
think
countries' data as reference.
I don't think anybody's data is any better than what we have today. I think we have a large enough data set today that we could utilize it as a normalization set. So I think that there are some, but yeah, I don't think it's necessary.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys for the third time. I think you did a great job. We're going to close Q&A. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope you learned something tonight. Come join us on August 18th for our government relations panel. That'll be joinclab.com. August 25th, live in Delray Beach, Florida at Hopportunities. That's going to be our diversity, equity, and inclusion panel. And we have a lot more coming up. Sign up for our newsletter at joinclab.com. And we will see you guys next month. Take care, everyone.
All right, take care.